Rick and Mike are, is Mike's, I'm assuming, coming?
He's on his way.
Yeah.
So,
We have your slideshow.
Yeah, this is in the PDF, so we'll put the page down for you.
And we can
Oh, yeah.
dim the room a little bit because it's kind of washed out. Hi, Alan.
Hey there.
How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you all?
Good.
Good.
Ready to go?
That clock is a minute slow, so we'll just be going in a minute. It's been a long day, Dan.
Okay, so are we ready to go, Amy?
Let her rip.
Okay. I would like to call to order the June 15th, 2022 meeting of the Conservation Commission of the Town of Harwich, Massachusetts. This meeting is being held as both an in-person meeting and an online meeting. It's a hybrid meeting. Anybody who wants to participate online or by telephone may do so by using the codes that are shown on the website for the town of Harwich under Conservation Commission and under the agenda for tonight's meeting. I would like to start the meeting tonight with the first item, which is a request for a determination of applicability for 10 Doan Way, map 13, parcel X1-7. Is there somebody ready to speak for the proponent on this?
Yes, Lynn Hamlin. I usually like to stand up, but I'll sit down.
Wherever you're comfortable.
Relative thing. Oh, you're gonna make him yell at me? Okay. Lynn Hamlin, representing the applicant. This application is simply for a swimming pool that straddles the 100-year flood elevation, which is the boundary of your land subject to coastal storm flowage. It is outside of the 100-foot buffer to the wetland that's located to the rear of the property. The septic system is being relocated and upgraded to accommodate the pool, but with the relocation, it will be upgraded to be elevated above adjusted groundwater by the use of a pump, and the tank, I believe, is going from a 1,000 to a 1,500 gallon size. It's going within our lawn area. I assume everybody got in the fence and looked around or peeked over the top of the fence. There's 2 trees that are proposed to be removed. One is outside of your jurisdiction entirely, and the other one's a cherry tree located outside of the buffer zone but within the flood zone. And I will let you ask me questions from there.
Okay, thank you very much. Amy, do you have comments on this matter?
Sure. So none of the project is located within 100 feet of the vegetated wetland. Some of it is within flood zone, as Lynn said. The flood zone kind of snakes through the property. So the pool and septic are going to be in the flood area. The pool or the patio around the pool is proposed to be dry laid with pavers, and any roof runoff, or any runoff from the patio going into the lawn. As it's very flat here, and I have no issue with that. I don't see any erosion happening. Any pool water that would be removed would be pumped and removed from the site. And I would recommend a -2 determination because the work is technically in the flood zone, with the condition that the pool water does get taken off site if ever drawn down or removed. and that no fertilizers or chemicals be used within the 100-foot buffer or the flood zone on this property.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Wayne, do you have any comments or questions on this?
No, I looked at it today, it looked pretty simple to me.
Okay. Alan?
No comments?
Mark?
No remarks, thank you.
Brad? And I don't have any comments. Are there any comments or questions from anybody who is present here in the audience? Okay, are there any comments or questions from anybody who is participating online or by telephone? Okay, hearing none, I would like to call for a motion on this matter.
I'll make a motion for a -2 determination for John and Pamela Connor on 10 Doan Way, map 13, parcel X1-7 for a pool and septic. With the only order conditions being what Amy had mentioned earlier, that the pool water be removed from the site and no chemicals or fertilizer used within the buffer zone.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor and a second on that motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'd like to take a vote. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is, again, a request for determination of applicability for 52 North Road, map 19, parcel S1. It is my understanding that the applicant for this has requested a continuation to our meeting of July 6, 2022.
Correct?
Amy, is there any further discussion on this matter?
No.
Okay, then I would like to call for a motion to continue this matter to the meeting of July 6, 2022.
I'll move for continuation for 47 North Road.
52. It's 52.
This is 52, Mark.
So it is.
That's all right. Okay, so
Then make it
the motion
52.
will be for 52. Do I have a second for that motion?
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion on the motion on the floor? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Hearing no opposition, the motion passes unanimously. This matter will be continued to our meeting of July 6, 2022. The next thing on the agenda is a request for an amendment to the order of conditions for 47 North Road, map 19, parcel S2. My understanding is, just like the previous matter, the applicant has requested that this be continued to our meeting of July 6th, 2022. Is there any further discussion on this, Amy?
No.
Okay, then I would like to call for a motion to continue this matter to our meeting of July 6th, 2022.
I'll move to continue to 47 North Road.
Okay, do I have a second for that motion?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing no discussion, I will take a vote. All in favor of continuing this matter to the meeting of July 6, 2022, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, this matter will be continued to July 6, 2022. The next item on the agenda is a notice of intent for 27 Sacratech Bluff Road. Is there anybody here to speak for the applicant on that matter?
Good evening, David Clark, Clark Engineering on behalf of the Shanahans, owners of the property. We were here 3 weeks ago? 4 weeks. And the commission asked for revisions to the restoration mitigation plan. O'Leary Landscaping has provided a revised plan, hoping that that satisfies what the commission was looking for.
Okay, thank you. Amy, do you have any comments or questions on this matter?
That wasn't me.
I would be in support of it with just a couple of changes to the plant types, and I'm hoping the owner would be amenable to them. The reason is I just don't think a couple of the plant types that are being proposed are really suitable for an exposed, salty, windy coastal situation. So I would suggest, just because they're not gonna live, I don't think, that you remove the sweet pepper bush. The others are a little bit, questionable too, but I would see how they go. I'm a little nervous about the shadbush serviceberry too, in that location, but, the other ones should do okay. What I would suggest instead, and there's no reason to continue this or on, I think it's an easy substitution, I would choose beech plum, bayberry, or pasture rose instead of, or a mixture of that instead of the sweet pepper and the shadbush serviceberry. Shadbush is a small tree, and it's only one of them is proposed, so I would suggest a beech plum in its stead, as that's a large shrub. Originally, I had thought that it would be better to have the mitigation plantings along the top of the bank, but it's proposing to remove lawn area that's still within the 50-foot buffer zone, albeit on the sides of the property, and they'd probably have wanted smaller plantings if they were gonna do it right at the top of the bank to preserve their view. So this way, you do get some larger size plantings on the side property lines. So I would, with the changes that I had mentioned, to the plantings, I would recommend approval, with the condition that they do not fertilize organically or chemically their area within the 100-foot buffer.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I would like to begin our questioning by asking the applicant whether or not they'd be amenable to the changes that Amy has just suggested.
I don't see why they wouldn't.
Okay, so you're saying they would be amenable to those changes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'll ask the other commissioners if they have any questions or comments. I'll start this time with Brad.
Yeah, so I missed the first hearing, so I think I probably should abstain, but I think I'll ask a couple questions all the same.
Even though you missed the first one, you only missed one, so technically, if you feel comfortable voting on it, you can.
Okay.
But absolutely ask questions.
Yeah, but I won't revisit some of the issues. I think, I guess one question is the length of the boardwalk. Is the boardwalk gonna be removed seasonally?
I think it is.
The bottom portion,
The bottom portion,
Not-
because
yeah.
of the escarpment. Yeah,
Yeah.
the stairs will certainly be removed.
And the bottom boardwalk will come out?
Yeah.
There's a portion, so the way the site is, it goes down, there's a coastal bank and it goes down, and then you have a dune field, and it's gonna cross over that, and to my understanding, that would actually, it's gonna be elevated, and actually would probably be less damaging to leave that portion in. And then the portion that then goes down again to the beach where there's a scarp,
Right.
that would come out.
That's what I was wondering about, because otherwise the storms would get it.
Oh, yeah,
all the
so
same.
either take it out, or they make the stair, you can make them so they fold up on top of the boardwalk.
Okay. All right, that was, I think, my only question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Mark?
I have no remarks, thank you.
Alan?
No comments.
Wayne?
No comment.
Okay, and I have no comment. So, is there anybody in the audience here tonight who has any comments or questions on this matter? Hearing none, is there anybody online or on the telephone who has any questions or comments on this matter? Okay, hearing none, then I would call for a motion on this matter.
I'll move that we approve the notice of intent for 47 Sacratech at Bluffs Road.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor and a second on that motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Hearing no opposition, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Okay, the next matter on our agenda is again a notice of intent for the Inn on the Beach at 16 Bank Street, map 7, parcel F2, for beach cleaning and nourishment. Is there anybody present to speak for the applicant on this matter?
I stole your pen.
Okay. If you could just go to the microphone and introduce yourself, please.
Yes, good evening. Peter Macri, I'm the owner of Inn on the Beach, 16 Bank Street. The prior order of conditions that was in place under the previous ownership had expired, and so we're looking to reinstate the order of conditions that would allow us to do periodic beach maintenance, including raking and on a when and if needed basis, supplementing any sand that might be lost to storm.
Okay, thank you very much. Amy, do you have any comments or questions on this matter?
Not too many, so this is similar to the one you just recently saw for their neighbor, the Winstead at Bank Street. The biggest issue here, as well as, the town property of Bank Street Beach, is that there are piping clovers and some turns that are there. So, Mr. Macri has already been in touch with Audubon to take control of the monitoring aspects of that project. As you can see from the aerials that were provided, this is a pretty highly, altered site. There's not, except on the fence lines between the properties, there's not a beach grass or really dunes. It is coastal beach. I feel like what they're asking is consistent with what the town does, as well as what the neighboring property, the Winstead, is allowed to do. And I would recommend approval of the project. And what I took the liberty of doing in advance, because this is exactly the mirror image of really what your neighbor wants to do, is I did draft a preliminary order of conditions. Should you see this as a amenable project, there's a lot of accountability, which it works its way into the order in terms of monitoring for those birds. So, and nourishment would have to obviously be above mean high water. This is like in a worst case scenario where we have a major storm event, because actually this part of the beach in Harwich is accreting sand, so you have a good problem to have,
Glad to have it.
as opposed to other people. So I don't foresee you really needing to do that, hopefully at all. But it's there if you need it, just like the town has and just like the Winstead has that ability. So right now, you were allowed to do it kind of by hand. You're asking, if needed, to be able to use a barber
Right.
beach rake. So, I would recommend approval of this project with the conditions set forth by Natural Heritage, which are consistent with the neighboring properties' conditions.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Amy. Now, I'll ask the commissioners whether there's any questions. I'll start with Wayne.
No, I don't.
Alan?
No comment.
Mark?
No.
Brad?
I'm just scanning the order, the draft order right now, and I'm looking for monitoring requirements. It seems like, Amy, you've got them in there. Special condition 18.
There's a lot of monitoring requirements that we all have to live with, that
Yep.
they will as well.
Yeah, it looks consistent, so that looks fine.
Okay, so you have no questions, Brad? Okay, fine. Now, does anybody here in the audience have any questions or comments on this matter? Hearing none, is there anybody online or on the telephone who has any questions or comments on this matter? Okay,
So,
here,
Mr. Chairman?
yes.
I was just gonna ask, so what you could do is because we normally don't do the orders at the same time, you could either make a motion to close the hearing and approve the project in order, or we can do the order of conditions later on this evening.
Which do you recommend?
Well, maybe, so why don't we do two things? Why don't we do it like we normally would? Why don't you vote to approve the project, and pending a successful approval, then you can make another motion to approve the order.
Okay, I agree with that approach, Amy, so I
Later on?
think that's what we'll.
Oh, now.
Well, while he's here,
I think
figured, why
while he's
why
here,
make him
we'll do
wait?
it, Brad.
That's
Sure.
all.
I
So-
just have a couple minor edits, so.
Okay, please, yeah.
Pending edits.
Okay, well, let's first, if I could have a motion with regard to approval of the project.
Sure. I move that we approve the notice of intent for 16 Bank Street.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor in a second. Is there any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The motion passes. Now, I'd like to have a motion with regard to the closing of the public hearing and the issuing of the order of conditions.
I'll make a motion that we close the public hearing and issue the order of conditions to the...
Okay, do I have a second for that?
Second.
Okay, we'll have discussion, Brad. So I have a motion on the floor and a second. Is there any discussion on that motion? Brad?
Yeah, how do you want to handle review and edits? Because I'm sure people haven't reviewed it yet.
So, I mean, I have extra copies here. I did put it in Dropbox. I'm more than happy to take your comments. So now would be the time if you
Now,
have some.
you'd prefer to do it now?
Yeah, I don't want to have Mr. Macri have to wait through the whole night, that's all.
Okay,
Yeah, I think if we can do it now, Brad, that would be preferable.
all right. So I've given it the 3-minute scan.
Sorry, I don't mean to rush you.
That's okay. You know, these are very clean and.
I tried to make it consistent
You
with
do
what
a great
everyone else
job.
has to.
Special condition number 5,
Yep.
and I don't know how I know this, but it says Division of Marine Fisheries and Wildlife, DMF. It should be Division of Fisheries and Wildlife.
Okay, that's easy enough to fix.
Must be my day job.
Must be. And we had it wrong in the other order then, too.
Yeah, yeah, so a
Division.
couple places where correct DMF to DFW. And I think that was it. Lots of special conditions to monitor, so you've got your work cut out for you. I think that's all I got.
Okay. So we do have a motion on the floor. If I'm correct, I would say Brad's comments were more administrative than substantive. Am I correct on that, Brad?
Yes.
So I don't think that changes the motion at all. So is there any further discussion on the motion that has been put on the floor and has been seconded? Hearing none, I'll request all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? Hearing no opposition, the public hearing is closed and the order of conditions will be issued.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next,
Amy, the file says 16 Braddocks. Doesn't matter at all for our proceedings, but just the file itself.
Oh,
Said
I'm
16.
sorry. Yes, it does matter.
Just for future filing, I think.
okay, thank you,
Unless
Brad.
Braddocks has become waterfront.
It's actually, Bank. 16 Bank.
Yeah, 16 Bank Street, according to this. Okay, the next item on the agenda is 14 Mill Point Road, map 1, parcel J1-94. It's my understanding that the applicant for this has also requested a continuance to our meeting of July 6th, 2022. Amy, do we have any further discussion on this?
We just need a little more time to put together the materials that they promised you at the last meeting, so yes, they would like a continuance to July 6th.
Okay, fine. If there's no further discussion, I'd entertain a motion to continue this matter to our meeting of July 6th, 2022.
I'll make a motion, we continue this till July 6th for 14 Mill Point Road, map 1, parcel J1-94.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second for that motion?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor and a second to that motion. Is there any discussion on the motion on the floor? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing no opposition, the motion passes unanimously. This matter will be continued to our meeting of July 6, 2022. The next item on the agenda is Harwich Conservation Trust, Cold Brook Preservation, map 23, parcel C3-2, C1-0, and C1-1, Ecological Restoration. Do I have anybody to speak for the applicant on this matter? Michael, could you just introduce yourself for the record, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Conservation Commission, Town Conservation Administrator, members of the public. My name is Michael Locke, Executive Director of the nonprofit Harwich Conservation Trust. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening on behalf of the Brook Ecological Restoration Project. Also present on behalf of the HCT Board of Trustees is Tom Evans, President, and Chair of the Land Stewardship Committee of HCT, Colin Leonard. And we'll soon hear from Nick Nelson, who's been heading up the eco-restoration design process. Nick being Regional Director of Interfluve engineering firm specializing in the ecological restoration of wetland and riparian systems. And also, I might add, Nick is an alum of Harwich High, so we have some local roots here. What I'd like to do is introduce this eco-restoration project, which we know is under your review relative to your wetland protection bylaw and the state's Wetland Protection Act. I'd like to introduce two aspects of project background. One is site acquisition history, and the other is the town HCT partnership in this eco-restoration endeavor. So first I'll speak to the site's acquisition background. So HCT, as we know, founded in 1988 by volunteers from all walks of life with a common vision to preserve natural lands and where appropriate, restore them, to protect those natural elements, wildlife habitat, water resources, walking trails, scenic vistas, all of those elements that create the quality of life that we know and love in Harwich in this special corner of the Cape. And that was the intent back in 2001 when this 66-acre property on Bank Street became available for purchase from Mr. Carver Kroll. Now, by way of further background, in the late 1990s, early 2000s, what we began to see, and we've seen a trend continue to this day, is some growers feeling pressure, economic pressures beyond their control, that made cranberry farming unprofitable for some. And so they're looking for ways to exit the market. Some of those factors beyond their control, oversupply of cranberries from other parts of the country, Midwest, Wisconsin, outside our domestic borders into Canada, overproduction coming from Canada, driving down prices for quite a long time. There's other economic factors that have made it difficult. And so growers look for options. Some choose to develop upland, completely their right. Some choose a conservation path. And Harwich Conservation Trust has been fortunate to work with local growers and families for conservation outcomes on properties that are being transitioned out of the market. Now, back in the early 2000s, when HCT acquired this property, it was still investigating on whether to keep farming portions of the property, although other portions had been fallow for a long time. So we looked into cost-benefit analysis, sent out a request for proposals to every grower in southeastern Massachusetts. We didn't receive a response in the first round, sent another request for proposals or RFP out to all growers in southeastern Mass, received 2 responses. Neither worked out. Eventually, HCT chose a path of eco-restoration and connected with the state's Division of Ecological Restoration. Eric Ford from the Mass DER is present virtually with us tonight. And in 2011, or thereabouts, the project qualified for priority project status with Division of Ecological Restoration. And that opened up the door for technical assistance from DER staff as well as DER capital funds to help with the data collection and eco-restoration design process over the past several years. And I also wanted to mention that the site, circa 2015, was named in honor of HCT's first president for the first 27 years of the organization and a founding trustee, Robert F. Smith. The full name of the property, Robert F. Smith Brook Preserve. So as we started through the eco-restoration data collection process, and then into the design process several years ago. What emerged was a sincere town interest in this project with the primary goal of reducing nitrogen in the ground and surface water as it flows through the system on its way to Sacratech Harbor on Nantucket Sound. We know that the water quality has been impaired over the decades by too much nitrogen in Sacratech Harbor, and through the town's comprehensive wastewater management plan and a preceding nitrogen attenuation feasibility study funded by town meeting voters, the town select board and its consultants determined that there could be a savings to taxpayers in reduced need for sewering infrastructure in that watershed, savings of up to $6 million over time, with an investment of about $2 million by the town towards this eco-restoration project. In 2017, town meeting voters approved that authorization of $2 million towards this eco-restoration project in partnership with HCT. And since that time, the town, through its consultants, Brian Howes, Ed Eichner, David Young, and others, including Dan Pelletier, and other, Amy Ozowski, and Brad Chase through Division of Marine Fisheries, at times called in to consult about fish passage, best practices as the eco-restoration design unfolded. It was a consensus design decision-making process, which has resulted in the set of design plans that you have before you that you're considering this evening. And we're excited. We're excited about the fact that we're at this stage, that as we move through the permitting process, we hope to reach eco-restoration construction phase later this year into early 2023 and create even more of an inviting and inspiring destination for everybody who lives here and those who come to visit. Those three primary goals of the project: enhancing water quality, enhancing habitat diversity, and enhancing the visitor experience. A portion of this property we hope to accommodate a half-mile wheelchair accessible loop, which will also be a draw to the community. So with that as a background, I'd like to next turn the podium over to Nick Nelson, again, Regional Director and Fluvial Geomorphologist with Interfluve. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Again, if you could just introduce yourself again for the record, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chair. Nick Nelson, as Mike said, I'm a fluvial geomorphologist with Interfluve, based in Cambridge, but born and raised here in Harwich. And do you mind pulling up the PDF, please? As this restoration project is a little bit different than many, wetland projects you may have seen in the past, I thought it might be preferred to look through a few slides here, kind of walk through the designs a little bit, and then look at some pictures of some previously restored projects that are of similar nature to this one. So if you could go up one slide, the previous one, please. Yep, okay, so that just zooms us into, I don't know, can you see that okay?
Let me play with the lights a little
Maybe
bit.
we can dim a little bit, a little hard to see. I just want to get us zoomed in so we know where we are here before getting into the drawings.
That's pretty good.
There
Yeah,
we
I don't want to put it here.
Fine balance between falling asleep and being able to see. All right, so we are just north of Main Street right now. The white square is indicating the area of the Brook Preserve, just east of Bank Street. Next slide. If we go back in time a little bit to the late 1800s, this is a U.S. Geological Survey map of the area. We can see Grass Pond there. There's some headwater wetlands a little bit northeast of that as well, with that little stream coming underneath Bank Street. I believe there's a culvert there right now. And then wetlands between Grass Pond and Sacratech Harbor as we know it now. Very different back then. We don't know if there was a distinct channel back then. It doesn't show up in this map, but there are lots of things that didn't show up at this scale map back in the 1800s. But this indicates that it was a wetland at that time. Next slide. And then by the early 1900s, we can see the cranberry cultivation has moved into the area. That whole parcel of Brook Preserve right now, as we know it, being farmed for cranberries. And now at this stage, you can see that active channel extending from Grass Pond all the way through the project site out to Sacratech Harbor. The area just upstream of Bank Street, to the west of Bank Street, was also cranberry bog, I believe, at that point as well, which is not now. Next slide. So zooming in a little bit more, here we can see the aerial photograph of the project site under essentially existing conditions. We can still see that main channel flowing from the left side of the screen, east and then south, out to Sacratech Harbor to the south there. The project also includes what we're calling Cedar Swamp Bog, and I'll point to that. This bog right here. That was recently acquired by the trust just within the last couple of years, and that is now part of the project as well. Next slide. As Mike said, there are a number of different project partners. This is a primary partnership between the town and the Harwich Conservation Trust. Town being represented by their consultants, CDM Smith and TMDL Solutions in UMass Dartmouth, with the folks that Mike mentioned, and the Harwich Conservation Trust and the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration partnering with ourselves at Interfluve to do the design of the design drawings of the project. Next slide, please. Mike mentioned the primary goals for the town being nitrogen attenuation, water quality. For Harwich Conservation Trust, that is a primary goal as well, but other goals include ecosystem restoration and recovery, holistic restoration, as well as maintained and improved recreational opportunities. Next slide. So if we look at the whole site here, this is a bit of a cartoon, a mock-up of one of the sheets in the design drawings showing the primary elements of the restoration. The blue polygons are shallow ponds. These are approximately 2 meters deep, so about 6 feet deep, a little over 6 feet deep. And that depth was developed in conjunction with the town's consultants to maximize that nitrogen attenuation on the site. The squiggly blue line is the new stream channel being constructed. So taking the channel outside of its existing straighter ditch and recreating a more meandering, sinuous stream pattern between these ponded areas. And then the green polygons around those ponds are deep marsh. So these are areas that will have vegetation growing through them. They will have water through most of the year. And it's an additional wetland habitat ecosystem that we can have on this site. The yellow polygons are the shallow emergent marsh. So we're essentially going from the pools, the ponds, to deep marsh to then shallow marsh as we get shallower and shallower water moving towards the edges of these bogs. Outside of those areas, it would be forested wetland once it has a chance to mature and evolve. At the downstream end of the project, at the far southern end in cell 8, that's the blue polygon. At the far downstream end, that's the developing salt marsh. So currently, tidal flows do come into this area through all of cell 8 and also a little bit further upstream than that. And we have this fringe salt marsh vegetation right along the channel right now, and that will expand into the future. We have a new sinuous stream channel coming through portions of that bog, and we're recapturing a portion of the bog, of that channel on the downstream end. Next slide. So I'll walk through, because it's a big site, I just wanted to walk through each of the smaller areas individually, and this is referring to the design drawing. So this is on sheet 7, showing the treatments. Prior to this sheet are some cross sections on your design drawings to look at elevations and then prior to that is the grading sheet. But this kind of shows the treatment of what we might expect to see out on site. So this is starting at the upstream end. We have Bank Street on the far left side of the screen, and the Cold Brook coming underneath Bank Street and entering the site on the lower left side of the screen here. Cold Brook will stay in its existing channel through that adjacent to Cell 1 area there. Cell 1 is that first bog that you see looking east from Bank Street. And in that area, there'll be some microtopography. So essentially, I'll show some pictures of that later. But that's essentially turning over the sand and peat material there that exposes some of the seed bank that is within the soil and the peat, and also would include filling some of those ditches in that area. The next bog just downstream of that to the east is Cell 2, and you can see the larger pond in the middle there with the deep emergent marsh outside of that, shallow emergent marsh beyond, and the forested wetland beyond that. You'll see the call out for the large wood habitat. These are logs and logs with root wads that will be placed in the stream channel itself for habitat, aquatic habitat for fish cover, but also some woody material will be placed on the bog surface for more wetland terrestrial habitat as well. Next slide. Very similar design for Cell 3. We're starting off with an open water area at the left-hand side. Similar habitat types with deep emergent marsh and shallow marsh and forested wetlands. More large wood habitat along the stream channel and in the wetland areas. Next slide. This is moving east again into cells 5 and 7. Cell 6 is the area, show it here. This area here, that's more for staging and some stockpiling. There's also a little forested area right there that will not be part of the project. Cell 5 is the area right now that is a bunch of pine tree saplings if you're walking around this area. It's upland, it hasn't been farmed in quite some time, and it has no sign of wet areas on that bog surface. The stream channel, based on the probing and surveys that were done of the subsurface area using ground penetrating radar a number of years ago, it was indicating that the former channel and wetland may have been on the north side of this area as opposed to where the channel goes right now, which is straight south through here. So we reconstructing the stream channel to go back into what we believe was the general area of the former channel and wetland location. Kind of moves southeast from Bog 7 into from Cell 5 into Cell 7. Again, more open water area, more deep marsh, more shallow marsh. The area on the western side of Cell 7 will not be touched. That has some good forested wetland right now that is maturing, some decent sized saplings and trees. So there will be no construction activities in that western portion of Cell 7. Next slide, please. This is going to mess with your eyes a little bit. This is turned sideways to fit on the screen and on the design drawings. So north is to the left, south is to the right. Stream flow is going from left to right through here. This is the salt marsh area, proposed salt marsh, existing tidal zone. The areas that you see in the hatching there around the stream channel, all of that area is the area of disturbance. The area on the west side and the lower portion of that cell, again, will not be disturbed, will remain as is, that you see it there. If you've walked around the site, you may have noticed a large pond, tailwater pond that was used during the agricultural practice. That's pretty stagnant water right now. That will be used, that will be filled with the excavated material that comes off of the bog site through the channel and pond excavation. Next slide, please. Cedar Swamp Bog, there's no stream channel flowing through this bog, so this is simply filling in some of those ditches and creating that microtopography that I talked about before. A little bit of sand removal, trying to get some of that sand off to get closer to the peat underneath and closer to a wetland condition. Those larger dark polygons that you see there, according to, again, probing that was done through digging holes into the sand and then poking through the peat underneath, those are areas that had very little peat, underlying peat. And so historically, they may not have been robust wetlands. And so these are going to be mounds that are a couple of feet high that might provide habitat for turtles and other potentially upland species, upland plant species as well. So a little bit of microtopography, a little bit of macrotopography on this site, still generally draining towards the culvert under the road there and eventually into Cold Brook just east of Bank Street. Next slide. So as you get towards the end of the plan set, there are some typical details, just kind of describing some of this work that is a little atypical. And so you can see some of the cross sections here showing how the large wood is put in place. It's not, the root wads and logs are not just tossed into the stream or onto the floodplain. They're embedded into the stream banks so they stay in place and don't float right away with the fluctuating water levels. The vertical pieces, we call those vertical timber piles. Those are logs that are driven into the ground that help to hold those horizontal pieces in place, but also provide perching habitat and other habitat for birds in the area. The lower typical detail there shows the stream in plan view. So looking down on it, and you can see how those large wood features are providing that habitat for aquatic organisms. Next slide. It's a big site. A lot of planting will be included in this. We are fortunate in these projects in general, and we've installed and implemented a number of projects to date in Plymouth County and in Falmouth as well. And we've found that through this microtopography and stirring up of the soil and the peat underneath, that there's a lot of native plants that grow immediately. Dozens and dozens of species that grow on these project sites. So we haven't had the need to spread native seed across this site. It looks barren and pretty scary initially with all the disturbance right away, but within that first growing season, we see a lot of growth and robust vegetation diversity throughout. That said, our focus will be on more of the potted plants and plugs through this whole site. So we have a number of different planting zones, forested wetlands, some upland locations, upland grasslands, the tidal marsh zone right along the new channel. Some tidal species will go along that edge. If you go to the next slide, I'll show a table with some of the species that are being proposed. So in each one of those ecosystem sections and planting zones, this is our current proposed planting list. Still in evolution here, will be finalized as we move through the permits and into kind of the final stamped construction drawings. But we see from forested wetlands and shallow emergent marsh, a lot of native shrubs and trees, Atlantic white cedar being the primary one in that forested wetland zone. Atlantic white cedar is a globally rare ecosystem now, and so we've seen some tremendous growth of these trees on these project sites and other projects. So I just wanted to point out in the tidal zone, the tidal marsh zones, primarily looking at smooth cordgrass and salt meadow cordgrass and salt hay grass in those areas. Next slide, thank you. Getting close to the pictures. This is the slide that kind of shows some of the infrastructure that Mike talked about with the trails and crossings. Many of the stream crossings right now are pipes that are undersized and don't have terrestrial passage through there. They don't meet the stream crossing standards of Massachusetts. So those crossings will be removed, and where access will be maintained, they'll be replaced with bridges, free-span bridges that will look like a boardwalk. You'll see the ADA trail in blue there. We'll have 2 stream crossings. Those will be, again, a bridge across the stream. So there'll be a stream, there'll be a little bench, and there'll be a slope going up to the edges of those crossings, railings on the side there, and ADA accessible trail around those berms of cell 2. The other star separating between cell 3 and cell 5 will be another one of those bridge crossings, small bridge crossings. And then there'll be about a 100-foot boardwalk that will cross the wetland and stream between cell 7 and cell 8. This is sort of the more vulnerable location within the site in terms of infrastructure because of that tidal fluctuation in this area. So that's one of the reasons for having that expanded crossing to allow floodwaters and tidal flows to go underneath that boardwalk. Next slide. Oh, sorry, if you can just stay there a moment. There is the star at the far upper left side is a viewing platform. The intent there is to provide an ADA accessible platform for folks to go out and kind of get a decent view of the project site. Next slide. What these look like in other projects, this is the Coonamessett River Trail in Falmouth that was completed a few years ago. Same design team that implemented this one. You can see the bog restoration in the open area there, just a couple years after construction. And then the trail that they're walking on there is that ADA accessible trail. In the background, you can see the boardwalk, which we'll go to in the next slide here. And that's the boardwalk. The designs for Cold Brook crossings and boardwalk are not exactly like this, but it's the same design firm, Stimson Associates, a landscape architecture firm, and it will be a similar design with the crossing and the railings on top. Next slide. Next few slides kind of show some of the construction images of these other projects, so we have a sense of what this work is like. You can see the straightened ditch originally in the upper right photo there, and then the contractors digging out a more sinuous stream channel. You can see here is an interesting picture. It shows the water levels under existing conditions, shows water levels in the constructed condition relatively the same, essentially just digging a new channel in the same, near that old channel. Next slide. During construction still, but after this particular area, after the stream channel was finished, all the microtopography isn't done yet. You can still see a lot of the tracks from the contractors moving around here. You can see that it's a much wetter site than it was before, but that's because of those topographic low points now that are getting down to that groundwater that's being exposed. Next slide. Still during construction, but after a bit of a growing period, you can see this is all that native seed growth that just grew right in. So none of this was planted, none of this was seeded. It was cranberry bog prior to this, and this is one growing season in with all that vegetation growing up on its own. Next slide. This is a look at Foothills Preserve in Plymouth, similar size stream channel that we've proposed for Cold Brook. The large wood constructed on the stream bank, again, 1 year after construction, none of that was planted, all that vegetation came up on its own. You can't see the Atlantic white cedar trees that were planted right now, but they are scattered in certain areas there. Next slide. This is a look at one of those pools and ponds that was constructed in Plymouth. So you have a sense of what some of that ponded area might look like and some of the deeper and shallow emergent marsh, that transition from pond to wetland along the edge. Next slide. And then the Atlantic white cedars. So in Plymouth at this site, Eel River, 17,000 Atlantic white cedar trees were planted, about 3 feet tall to start. And 10 years after, they're 15 to 20 feet tall, propagating new seedlings on their own and creating that Atlantic white cedar forest. Next slide. We know all of this work requires disturbance of existing regulated resource areas. And we believe that that necessary disturbance results in this long-term benefit to these resource areas. This is a table that describes those disturbances. Overall, there'll be a slight increase in bank, a slight increase in vegetated wetland and tidal marsh and land underwater. So there's generally a slight increase in some of these resource areas as we're converting one of those upland bogs to open water area, stream, and wetland. Next slide. Finally, here is a look at the project schedule. The construction, that should say DER and Harwich Conservation Trust, apologies for that, but this is generally looking to complete final design and permitting by the end of 2022 and getting into the bid process at that point. Hope to go to construction in beginning of 2023 with construction completion in the fall of next year. Town will be monitoring the project long-term. They're monitoring it right now and will continue to monitor through construction and in the years following construction. And with that, we'll take questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Amy, do you have any comments or questions on this?
Yes, please. Just so first for the commission to be aware, we have not heard from the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program. I know that they have filed with that and gotten confirmation for that. With a project of this size and scope with potentially numerous types of flora and fauna of special concern at the site, and hopefully attracting more after all this, but I wouldn't suggest that you vote on the project tonight because there could be a lot of conditions, potentially conditions that would alter a little bit of this, the way the scope of the project. We've seen that before. So just wanted to start with that. Also to let the people know in the audience, so this is all being taped as well as live streamed. So you can watch it on the Harwich YouTube page. We have all these plans in the Conservation Department. You can see, I'm sure this presentation we can make available. Because I noticed a lot of people trying to, take pictures on phones and stuff, and we can make it all available to you much more readily. So that being said, I don't have, so we look at this in the scope of how it meets the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and the Town of Harwich Wetlands Bylaw and Regulations. And it's a much bigger project than we normally see. And it's an exciting project that I've been a small part of for a while. My questions are gonna focus a little bit more on the structures you're putting back in. So you're proposing, I don't have questions about the viewing platform, but in terms, I didn't see a plan for your boardwalk, which you mentioned, and actually in your plan, you showed crossings on sheet R1, but really it didn't mention boardwalk. So that was a newer component that maybe I missed it in all of this, but I wasn't aware of. And that typically, like we had a gentleman here tonight who was asking for a raised boardwalk. We want more specifications on that. I was a little bit, when you showed the picture of the other one with the boardwalk with the sides to it, and it looks like a flat top, I would recommend something that is a little bit more porous, higher up, more light penetration while still allowing people to have access. So, interrupt me.
Yes, so Stimson now has those designs finalized or drafted that I can send to you. And we have both the crossings, the shorter crossings and the boardwalk itself. So I'll send those to you right away.
Yeah, we would love to see those, and I think those
Yep.
would be important in the commission's making their decisions for the
Sure.
stream crossing and the walkway.
Yeah, and just in terms of the elevation, the low core to the bottom of that was pretty important to us as well in terms of allowing water to flow through. So that's been elevated above the existing 100-year flow elevation through there. So for each of those crossings, we're above that. elevation.
So I don't know how that would tie into, so our regulation is that raised staircases or boardwalks, walkways have to be at least 18 inches above grade. So I'm assuming most of that, I mean, most of this area's flood zone, it should be above that anyway, but just so you are aware, so you can review that with that lens, 18 inches. And that is for your goals, I mean, for restoration, it's our goals to make sure that we don't get a scar underneath where there's no vegetation growing or where it has any impact to the bottom there. Have you, in other projects, and I know Marsh very well, when you do your microtopography and kind of expose the old soils there, have you seen a lot of invasive regrowth, and how, if you get any, are you proposing to deal with that?
Yeah, good question. When we first started doing these in Plymouth, it was a bit of an unknown as to what would come up, and we were surprised in that it was almost entirely native seeds that came up. That is certainly changes if you have existing invasive plants nearby during construction that can blow seed in. Currently, the trust is working to treat invasive plants on the site right now to try to knock some of that back. The contract for the construction contractor, according to the specifications that we typically include, will include a 3-year warranty that both warranties the plants that they put on the site, but also warranties a weed-free site. So they will be required to treat and remove invasive plants that come up during that 3-year period, so that we can allow the native plants to get some traction. And beyond that, it will be up to the trust to maintain as they see fit on the site.
Thank you. So just for the commission's edification, they have received their permits through you over the past couple of years to do that invasive removal that Nick's talking about. I guess it's more.
Anything else, Mike, on that you wanted to add? Okay.
I was just gonna point, I mean, overall, I'm greatly in favor of this project. I know a lot of work went into the design, a lot of science went into the design. Of course, every site is different and every outcome might be slightly different. But the overall theme is that you're taking what was a highly altered site with flow and, just the land itself highly altered, then you're recreating it back to as close as you can in terms of where the stream you think used to be, and putting it back to normal with the enhancements of these ponds to help with our nitrogen problem that we have. So in general, I mean, they're creating much more wetland than you currently have there, and creation of these different types of wetland, the deep water pond, the shallow pond, the emergent marshes, the salt marshes, and then obviously buffer zones. While it will be a initial impact to what is there, that in the long term, you're putting something back to what is close, to normal conditions as you can get. So I think in the grand scheme of things, I mean, this is the right thing to do. But I do want to see a little bit more specifications on the things that I asked for. So with that, I really don't have any more questions or comments at this point. I know the commission does, so I will turn it over.
Okay, thank you very much, Amy. I'd like to just start with one question, and this is probably more for Mike than for you. Over the past few years, as you've been developing this project, there's been discussions, some in the press, with regard to differences of opinion between the trust and the town with regard to the design and how to accomplish the various goals. Mike, could you just enlighten us a little bit about what that discussion was about, and whether or not those differences have been resolved, and if so, how they've been resolved?
Sure, thanks for the question. So what the chair is referring to is two relatively recent meetings of the select board at which the memorandum of agreement between the Town Select Board and Harwich Conservation Trust was discussed. The memorandum of agreement is drafted essentially as a roles and responsibilities governance document to manage the partnership for this eco-restoration process. And I would venture to say that there was agreement on most of the document, and the questions that arose, most have been addressed. One is still outstanding, and if I can recall without recollection verbatim of what Chairman Ballantyne was expressing, but I will attempt to recall the spirit of his concern, was that he wished that there was additional language relative to the town's primary interest in nitrogen attenuation. My view is that there was adequate language because we have understood and accepted and agreed that the town's primary interest is in nitrogen reduction. That's also an interest of HCT in efforts to enhance water quality on site and as well as downstream in Sacratech Harbor. And we're working together, Harwich Conservation Trust and the Select Board, specifically Select Board Member Ballantyne and the chair, the Water Department Superintendent of the Wastewater Commission, Dan Pelletier, on adding language to the MOA that will address Mr. Ballantyne's main issue with the MOA to date. We do not have a follow-up date on the schedule to meet with the Select Board, but we anticipate that to be in July, where we will discuss the MOA for a third time and hopefully reach an agreeable draft. Note that the MOA has been reviewed by Town Council on the Select Board's behalf. So I think we're almost there and look forward to finalizing the document soon. Is that helpful?
That's very helpful, Mike, but I think part of my question goes more to the design process and the design that you have shown us today that's at 75% completion. Has the Board of Selectmen reviewed that design, and is the Board of Selectmen and the town in agreement with the design as far as it has gone today?
My understanding is yes, and especially since this has been a consensus decision-making process with the town's consultants, CDM Smith, UMass Dartmouth School for Marine Science Technology, and TMDL Solutions, all the way through the design decision-making process. And during the last Select Board meeting on this topic, Brian Howes of SMAST and Ed Eigner from TMDL Solutions were present. Brian speaking in particular about the design process and where it is to date.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Will the final design then have to be reviewed by the Board of Selectmen and approved by the Board of Selectmen before you go forward?
In the MOA, the final decision-making rests with the landowner, Harwich Conservation Trust. In the current MOA draft, any substantive changes to the 75% design level, which is what you saw tonight, conceptual, and in your design drawings, any substantive changes to that level of design that you have seen would be reviewed by the Select Board. That's the current language that's been added to the MOA that resulted from the first of the 2 meetings with the Select Board on this topic.
Great. Thank you, Mike. That's very helpful. Now I'll turn it over to the other commissioners. Wayne, do you have comments or
Yeah, I have a
questions?
couple of questions. Just from my own knowledge, can somebody explain the mechanics of how this works, reducing the amount of sewering that's gonna be needed in that area around there? how does that actually work?
Yeah, so that is a question for the authors of the town contracted nitrogen attenuation feasibility study, principally Brian Howes and Ed Eichner, again, respectively working with the School of Marine Science Technology, short SMAST, and TMDL Solutions, Ed Eichner. Generally speaking, by virtue of the increased habitat area relative to salt marsh in cell 8, the increase in the Colebrook stream length, the increase in the shallow and deep emergent marsh habitats collectively, those will be the drivers of nitrogen attenuation, nitrogen reduction in the system. If Nick or Eric of DR would like to add anything, feel free. But that is what has been expressed, I'll say generally speaking, throughout this consensus design decision-making process.
The next question is probably for Brad more than anybody. Are there any herring running up through there now?
They come up, they cannot reach Grassy Pond
Right, well,
presently.
this will allow them, permit them to go under Bank Street and go into Grassy Pond and?
No, this project does not go on the other side of Bank Street, but
No.
but it still has the interest, I think, of having channels that are compatible to migratory fish.
So maybe they'll spawn in some of those ponds.
Maybe, and I think the goal is to eventually get passage at the flume west of Bank Street to
Yeah,
get fish in
clean
the
that
brook.
ditch out and let them go into the
Right.
pond.
What's next?
Yep,
That's all I have.
yep, I'll have some questions to follow up on that.
Okay, Al?
I have a lot, but I'm trying to put them all in order. I joined the Conservation Board because the town here owns a lot of property and a lot of cranberry bogs that have gone out of production due to some of the decisions that the board has made. I'd like to know what the difference is between, what is the difference of naturalization versus ecological restoration? This board has voted, prior to me, that we want to naturalize cranberry bogs. In my mind, the definition of naturalizing is to let it go back natural, let it happen. Take something that was natural hundreds of years ago, before they converted it to cranberry bogs, let it go back to let it go back natural before the cranberry bogs. Why do we need man-made ecological restorations if in fact this board has already voted for other properties, naturalizations? How is this better than naturalization? That's my first question. I got several. Thank you.
Yeah, should we answer each in turn?
If we could.
Nick, would you like to answer that?
Thanks, Al. That's a really good question. Each one of these bogs is a little bit different, certainly. So I guess my description of differences there is just these bogs have had, I believe, as you know, sand being placed on top of the former surface for 100+ years. And that sand, at least at Cold Brook, has developed into about 1.5 feet or so of thickness on top of that former wetland surface. And what we see in a number of locations throughout Cold Brook are non-wetland plant species growing in those areas. Some locations of the Cold Brook Preserve have wetland species growing, certainly. They're wetter than others. But in many cases, the hydrology has been impacted by that placement of sand on top. And so letting these bogs go, in some cases, would allow them to develop into sort of a pine forest, and we've seen that in a lot of cases, pitch pine or other sort of upland type of forest, which is a valid ecosystem. It's not a functioning wetland ecosystem. And so this ecosystem restoration, ecological restoration, tries to remove some of those barriers to hydrology and ecological function. The restoration term is problematic, I think. We cannot convert anything back to what it once was, 300 years ago. That's not what we're trying to do. There are too many changes to our neighborhood, our watershed right now. What we're trying to do is restore the function of these wetlands. And in this particular case, to do that is getting these designs in place. In other cases, letting it go might allow us to get there.
Amy?
Can I add on to that,
Yeah,
Mr.
if you
Chairman?
would, please, Amy.
So in the one that you're alerting to for the town, part of the determining factor to allow to naturalize without interference was, and it was only part of the decision, was that this project was, the Bell's Neck was reviewed by DER a couple of years ago, informally, just had them out, and it's a smaller, much smaller property, and it's to the side of the Herring River system, but not immediately part of it. So funding, to be honest, was a partial factor in naturalization versus eco-restoration for the Bell's Neck. It was just one of a couple of factors that the commission considered at the time, and that the project in the Bell's Neck, at the time at least, was not necessarily a candidate for additional funding at that time, so.
Okay,
Did that help?
Alan, you have further questions?
Yes, can I go on, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
So, being in the cranberry bog business myself and my family for a long time, and others in the room here, the statements Mr. Locke made early on about the economics of the cranberry bogs. Looking at this and looking at the investment that the Conservation Trust has put into these bogs to purchase, going forward with this design, the town is involved. Seems to me that cranberry bogs are quite valuable. So I don't want, to put out the misnomer to folks that economics, bogs aren't worth anything. Because obviously it's worth a lot based on this design and proposal and research and study and wastewater and all the above. This town, this board, may want to look at other alternatives for existing cranberry bogs that people own in this town. This might be a way for them to do it themselves prior to foregoing the cranberry exemption. Because cranberry bogs in farming in the wetland resource are exempt. And you wouldn't have to go through this process. Possibly, I don't know if I'm right or wrong on that, Amy, but in my mind, I've worked on cranberry bogs, and you're correct. You scrape off something, you come back in 2 months or whatever, the earth heals itself, and it's amazing how fast things grow. So maybe out of this proponent, others in the future could look at this and maybe do that themselves as a private entity and get some of the funding from the state to help them as a private landowner. I just don't like seeing the town having this opportunity, and then it's always harder for private enterprises to do it.
Yeah.
It seems like the town is always the one that gets it because the town needs it. But then the poor private property guy, he gets blockades.
Okay.
That's one other thing.
Can I comment on that one?
Yes, sir.
Before you go on? I think it's a great idea, and I have been thinking about that for a long time in terms of the exemption. I did reach out to some folks with direct DEP experience, and at least their interpretation at the time was that unless the activities are for cranberry cultivation, it would not be allowed. I'll defer to Amy and others who know the laws better on that. However, I will say the town does not need to be involved for a private landowner to get this funding. We work with private landowners, and DER works with private landowners to get that state and federal funding for projects. So that is definitely a viable option, and the state Division of Ecological Restoration has an entire program dedicated to cranberries that are focusing on helping landowners out.
Alan, you have additional questions?
Couple other little smaller questions. The project that you have here, have you had it estimated based on your design? What do you think the actual cost will come in for somebody to contract this job?
Yeah, good question, and as you likely know, costs nowadays are so hard to predict, given the escalation that we've seen over the last couple of years. Since compared to 2020 prices, we've seen 15, 20, 30% escalation since then, as opposed to our typical sort of 3% annual increase. I believe our cost estimate, Mike, was at about $2.5 million, $2.5 million for the ecological restoration and the infrastructure pieces. Again, we don't know what will come through in the bidding, but that was the estimate.
And on that, what happens if it comes in at $5 million? What do you do then?
We reevaluate and see what we need to prioritize. There's a number of state and federal partners on this that are able to draw from additional funds potentially and other grant opportunities. But it's not the first time that we've gone through this process, and not the first time that, you know, many bids come in within or under the budget. Sometimes it's a little bit above, and we have to prioritize a few options there in terms of the activities.
And one final question.
Okay, go ahead, Al.
The scope and size of this project and the acreage that's involved, you want to get as many people as you can there to visit it, including ADA, handicapped folks, and so on and so forth. Where is the parking for this, and how many parking spaces are you looking to have there?
Good question. Mike, do you want to take that?
These are great questions. Thank you, Alan. So relative to parking, our preferred parking is at 203 Bank Street, where parking has been since the trust acquired this property back in 2001 through the good graces of the Select Board, which controls that roughly 2-acre town-owned property. This is the site that is not only the trailhead, has been for over 20 years, but the former, the original fire station in town, and then became the Harbor Master Workshop, and then we know also the subject of a Select Board request for proposals due soon, and we aspire in collaboration with a nonprofit Harwich Fire Association to be a competitor and hopefully be the partnership HCT, Harwich Fire Association proposal that can continue access to the trails to the south and also meet the goals of HFA, which is to restore the original fire station. The HFA has an interest in housing an antique fire engine there, and also other public safety aspects of public safety work. That is our preference, where the parking has been, and we would like to enhance it and create that ADA wheelchair accessible trailhead and viewing area and link to the trails to the south. Now, if we're not successful in acquiring that property and maintaining access, we do have an alternate parking area. It is smaller. It is further south off Bank Street. It's just north on the east side of Bank Street, north of where Brook flows under Bank Street. If you can envision that wedge of upland. I have consulted the town conservation administrator on the viability of placing parking there, just north of where Brook crosses under Bank Street. And we have worked with an engineer to draft 2 conceptual layouts that abide by wetland protection by the Wetlands Protection Act provisions with some mitigation built in. So we do have a fallback plan if our preferred parking option doesn't materialize. So that's where we are as of this moment.
Thank you for the answers.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, Mark?
Thank you. You got a lot going on there. Pretty intense project. Through the scope of the whole project, Is there any consideration or thought to what the impact may be on Paddock's Pond being north of that?
Would you like to answer that, Nick?
Thanks, Mark. Can you expand on that in terms of what components you mean by impact?
Will it aid in the health of the pond?
Should not really have any impact to that pond. The hydrologic impacts, the ecological restoration don't extend upstream of Bank Street, so there won't really be any change in conditions upstream of the project site.
So the underground flowage won't
It shouldn't change the conditions at all.
really?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any indication as to the outlying area, how far away it is going to potentially impact to the benefit for denitrification and the benefits in general?
Mm-hmm, sure.
Obviously, this has to have fingers that it's going to reach out. How far is it going to go?
Yeah, so generally what we know from the work that SMAST and TMDL Solutions has done in their past monitoring with groundwater and previous folks working with Harwich Conservation Trust, we know that the groundwater is typically coming from the north through the site. And so the goal of this is to, as that water comes in, be able to attenuate the nitrogen coming from that water. So that all that groundwater flow is coming south and then southeast towards Sacratech Harbor. So that's the water that will be treated through that nitrogen element that we've been talking about. It won't be extending that benefit beyond into other watersheds or anything like that. It's sort of treating that water as it comes into the project site.
Is there any manner to suggest the potential distance that water can drag anything with it?
Well,
to aid in the adjacent areas, what I'm getting at.
yeah, the project isn't going to be sucking more water into it, you know, because of the designs here. It's just whatever groundwater is currently flowing in will continue to flow in along those same pathways.
So it's not going to be increased then?
It won't be increasing the flow. It will be increasing the attenuation of the nitrogen.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's not changing the flow of groundwater.
Okay. The layer of sand that was projected that apparently had been utilized in the cranberry cultivation over the years, is there any approximation as to what the yardage is of that?
Our total excavation volumes, which includes the peat underneath and some of those ponded areas, I believe is close to 40 to 50,000 cubic yards. Haven't have to look at those numbers, and I can get that to you if you need, but just the sand itself is probably closer to the 10,000 cubic yard range. A lot of that bulk volume is in that peat underneath as you get deeper into those ponded areas.
Mhm.
But in those sort of deep emergent marsh areas and that sand on top, if I had to guess, it might be in that 10,000 cubic yard range. And all of that material will be reused on site.
Mhm.
So it will go into filling the ditches, filling the old channel, filling the tailwater pond. Anything additional will be deposited in those open upland areas as sort of a low hill in some of those spots.
Over the years, there's been a lot of changes in adjacent properties due to filling. There were bogs and wetlands that were filled in years ago. Is there any any impact from that going down to this project that would ever be something worth continuing, or not continuing, but considering or thinking about? Is there any impact from that that may affect this in any way?
Well, I think if we're thinking historically, historic filling of wetlands certainly reduces the capacity of our landscape to hold water, and to retain water, to capture that and infiltrate. This is speculation, but the difference in those maps from the late 1800s to the mid 1900s could include some of that, filling of wetlands that's forcing water somewhere else, forcing water to create a defined channel. That could be part of it. There could have more water in Cold Brook because of this more global filling of wetlands in the area. None of that is something that I've studied or know for a fact. It's just speculation based on your comment of filling in areas nearby. But that's typically what we see around the region is when we fill our wetlands, we have increased flooding, increased channel sizes to try to convey that water. Right now, as we see it, there's I can't envision any impact from past filling on the existing conditions right now. It is what it is, and it's been like that for a little while now.
Do you have any other questions, Mark?
No, not at this moment, but thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Mark.
thank you. Brad?
Yeah, sure, I've got a bunch. I'll start off with a feeble attempt at humor. Alan asked the difference between naturalization and ecological restoration. It's about $2 million. So, great project. Really exciting to see this going forward, and I can't wait to see it completed. I do have a couple concerns I want to talk about tonight. I think it's a great chance to talk these over, and they're really to do with the sustainability of migratory pathways for fish coming from the ocean. And I think the first one is probably the one that I have the most difficulty with, and I think it's the amount of woody debris and some of the configurations that are being proposed. If we can look at sheet 21, is it? Yeah, sheet 21. And
Going to the PDF.
yeah, 21 out of 22.
That's the typical details.
And woody debris is a great concept. I do think when you get to these really small coastal watersheds, you can have some problems with maintenance sustainability.
Keep going up.
And so this brook has about 1 to 3 cubic feet per second in the spring. It's a small creek. And once we get to flows about now into July,
Thank you.
your flows go down to about a half a cubic foot per second, thereabouts.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of concerned about the magnitude, amount of woody debris proposed, and some of these things like, in that lower graphic, you've got a partial buried tow log. I think that's great. I think those things are gonna be good. They'll provide habitats. It's the exposed root wads that push into mid-channel. I just picture over time them becoming places where you have wetlands plants grow, debris jam up. They're gonna be a problem for maintenance. So I think when you've got, 20 cubic feet per second, when you've got these bigger rivers, certainly the Pacific rivers, those are places that do really well with lots of wood.
Yeah.
Even the Coonamessett River in Falmouth, I think there's issues there. So and that's what, 2 or 3 times the size of this discharge. So I'm a little concerned about the total amount of woody debris, and then some of those root wad perpendicular placements are gonna stick out, they're gonna gather debris, and they're gonna be a place for wetlands plants to grow and possibly encroach on migrations as time goes on.
Have you had a chance to look through the Foothills Preserve site or Eel River where the channels are a little bit smaller? With that wood placed also?
I've been up there a few times.
Okay.
I've seen that. I don't think that the amount is as much as I'm seeing here, or maybe Coonamessett.
Yeah, it's pretty similar. So very different designs at the lower Coonamessett. That's a bigger river, and that was for bank stability and habitat. And if we go through that project, much bigger, of course, that is where the herring are hanging out right now, as they hang out in those pools by the wood, because it provides some cover and allows them to get upstream. The Foothills Preserve is a similar get down to 1 CFS. The Childs River in Falmouth also,
Yeah.
1 CFS, 2 CFS, somewhere around there. And it is a lot of wood when we think about a large piece of wood trying to put into a small channel. And we try to work with the contractor, place each piece so that we are thinking about passage and viability for fish moving through there. The pieces that you see crossing the stream channel, most of those are half buried in the stream channel, so they're typically angled. So if there is a low flow, there's always a low flow period, low flow portion of the channel. The root, in terms of vegetation growing in, these are small channels. We'll have vegetation growing in whether you have a root wad there or not. At least that's what we've seen in others. But we still have the movement of water. And on the Childs River, they have observed trout moving up through those streams and migrating through already 1 year after. So you know fish a lot better than I do, but what we've seen in some of these is that even if we do have these root wads and pieces of wood in there, the water forces its way around the wood, finds a path, and that's where the fish are able to go. And so they're able to move through these areas. In general, this is a really low slope, so it's not like you're going to be seeing water ripping through there. You're going to have some depth of water through most of the year where it's kind of backed up in there.
Yeah.
But I take your concern, and we can keep those root wads closer to the bank or higher in elevation above the water to provide that.
I think the ones that are submerged are probably fine. Ones that cross the bank and provide pathways for animals to go across, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you don't have trout here, you're not gonna have trout
Right.
here. It's way too-
Absolutely.
It's way too warm. Your species complex is very limited. You've got very few species. For migratory fish, you've got eel and river herring.
Yep.
And I think that, it is such a low flow system. And once summer kicks in, it really just grows in all around the channel. And so I just really picture those exposed root wads just gathering stuff over time. And I just think them as being a place where you're gonna find juvenile herring, which move passively downstream,
Mm-hmm.
a place where they get impinged.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to see the scale of maybe the root wads reduced for this project.
Okay.
I think there's amazing number of them, really. And I just think it's not a great watershed for that density of wood in the stream. So that's one comment I
Sure.
have. And then, I'm also a little concerned about the shallow emergent marsh and the sustainability of those channels for moving fish through upstream and downstream. What are your thoughts on the ability for those emergent wetlands to maintain a main channel through them that doesn't get, grown in with all kinds of wetland plants?
Yeah. I think through those marshlands, deep emergent marsh as well, you'll have your stream channel coming in, and then it will sort of disperse into this more open water area as you get into the deep marsh and then into the pond. That shallow marsh is likely that transition period. So I could envision there will be vegetation growing in many locations of that marsh area. Again, what we've seen on other projects where this has happened is where there is water flowing, where there's velocity and where there's discharge, it finds a way, and the fish find a way through those locations because of the adequate depth that we'll have of water here. I think if we were in a situation where we didn't have that adequate depth, where it might be a steeper slope, and we had shallower depths, I think that could be problematic. But here, where the slope is so low, we're gonna have water throughout the year that's gonna be sufficiently deep for fish to find multiple pathways through.
The trouble is the target species really, they're moving the flow. They're not fish that seek out alternative pathways. They seek
Right.
a main stem flow. And what I see, long time in Massachusetts is we have less surface flows, and so you're seeing these emergent plants, these wetland shrubs grow in, and they just choke off channels. And I really don't see Cold Brook having the summertime flows to prevent that from happening. And so what you're seeing is more and more municipalities off the Cape, for the most part, are looking at the idea of getting machines to maintain these channels. You know, these type of machines that get in there and grub out the channels. I think you're heading towards that type of a situation with these emergent wetlands. I don't know how they're not gonna receive things like, you know, swamp loosestrife that'll just, you know, arc into the channel and expand, and the water goes around it, but you lose that integrity to a channel that the fish will use. So I'm concerned about that. I don't know, you know, you've got your goals, I think, for restoration. I think there's goals for attenuation, which makes sense. I think the migratory fish angle needs a little more thought. I don't know if you could come back with some, maybe some O&M thoughts on maintaining that. So let me ask you about the water depth right now. In those emergent wetlands, how deep do you expect it to be in the middle?
The deep emergent, I believe, foot to a foot and a half, and the shallow emergent, it gets shallower as you move away from the stream, but close to the stream in that half foot to a foot, I believe. In the stream itself, where we've shown the stream, that's in the 2-foot range.
Yeah. I think it's gonna be a challenge to keep those channels open. But maybe there can be some contingencies in the plan that, you know, have adaptive management to come back and do some things, but I just, that's a concern that I have. You know, I think the town has a strong interest in the wetlands as well as the ponds for attenuation. I think from a migratory fish point, you would just wanna have channels, just to have these fish go through, but I think just note those concerns and you know, maybe come back with some ideas on how, or maybe some confirmation that you might think they will be supported and sustained on their own. Because I really do worry about wetland plants just coming in and choking those off. Next comment is on the, there's a riffle on sheet 7. So there's a riffle leading into the pond, and I want to ask about those specs. Is the riffle design based on any, you know, hydraulic or hydrologic calculations on what the flows would be, what the depths would be? I'm curious, from a fish passage standpoint, what they're going to encounter at that riffle.
I think that is a relic of a previous iteration of design.
Okay.
And is not necessary. I think in some areas, some designs, we need to make sure that the stream channel is meeting that upstream culvert to make sure we're getting the channel and we're not impacting the upstream culvert. In this case, I don't believe we are. I will check that again for you. In general, the riffle slopes would be shallow for passage, but I will confirm. I believe that's a relic of an older iteration of design.
Yep, if you want to go forward with it, maybe just come back with some H&H analysis on how it's going to look for depth and velocity.
For sure.
Dimensions. And that's about it. The last thing is, I think, time of year. Amy, I expect we would have time of year conditions for this.
That's partly what I'm waiting for Heritage
Yeah.
for as well. It looks like for what makes sense to me is that fall, winter is, it's non-growing season, that's an ideal time, I would think, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But Heritage will dictate also.
What we've seen in other projects is there is a time of year restriction for fish passage typically, but these projects are so big that we can typically continue to work through by providing fish passage around the site and doing all the other work. So we've done these projects in all seasons of the year. That fall, winter is a great time for it. And given our timeline, we're looking at a winter start. I think critically for this site is when we construct the Cell A, the tidal zone, I'd like to make sure that that's being completed at a time when those plants, tidal plants, the salt marsh plants are going in and can thrive. So that's sort of a critical timing element there.
Yep, okay. I think, yeah, the spring time of year is pretty important for the migratory fish that will be there.
Yep.
The brook has a surprisingly large number of eels that go up there.
A lot.
We've maintained an eel
Yeah.
trap with HCT for years, and it's,
great.
back when we were counting eels, you could have 25,000 glass eels come up.
Amazing.
Yeah, in a given year. I think that's it. I guess have a follow-up to Mike on what was asked earlier about the whole potential for the design to change. And I think it almost seems like it could. Do you think you might see some different configuration in terms of numbers of ponds or numbers of wetlands? Or do you think you're pretty close to where it's gonna be?
That's pretty set. Those numbers, those acreages, is what was presented to the select board a couple of years ago and was agreed upon, and so we kind of have to hit those targets in terms of that agreement with the select board.
Okay, so that's good to know for this board. With that in mind, I'd also say maybe consider the ability of having a little more of a defined channel in those
Yeah.
emerging wetlands that might be a little more sustainable. Just maybe investigate whether it's compatible with what you're trying to do.
I'm wondering if you might be amenable to a Zoom meeting with our design team at some point so that we can
Yeah.
talk through some of those details. I'm not a fisheries person, but other people have that expertise on the team, and so I'd be interested in having that conversation with you to kind of talk about the different options. I think there are some pretty simple things that we might be able to do.
Yeah.
But again, trying to balance all the different objectives and goals of the various parties, so
Right.
trying to
It's worth
find a way.
keeping in mind and try to avoid any substantial maintenance down the road. I think
Absolutely.
it's in everyone's interest. So, yeah, I'll be wearing another hat for this one, so by all means, I'd be happy to participate.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brad? Okay, thank you very much, Brad. First, before we move on, I just want to thank all of, Wayne, do you have
One
another?
more question.
Okay, Wayne, go ahead.
Has anybody given any thought to how you're gonna control mosquitoes if you create all these wetland puddles and things down there? Has a mosquito control project been, asked for their input on how they might go in there and control the mosquitoes?
Yeah, Mosquito Control has participated or has been approached on a couple of occasions. What we've seen in general in these projects, and this is I think in almost all of our public hearings, this has come up as a question. There are mosquitoes there now. There will be mosquitoes there afterwards. What we've seen with these projects is the tremendous growth in other mosquito-eating insects, birds, and other organisms that thrive in the restored ecosystem are able to keep some of those populations in check. So we have never, to date, none of our projects have resulted in abutters or people recreating around there complaining about an increased number of mosquitoes. So, been no specific studies on it, but, yeah, thank you.
Okay. Alan, you said you have one more quick question?
Quick question. You're driving down Bank Street, you're coming from Harwich Center to Harwich Point, and you look to the left at the old cranberry bogs. If this was to pass and go through, what are people gonna see differently from what it is today?
Well, during construction, I think as some people have commented on other projects, looks like a moonscape or a bomb has gone off during construction. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, it's a lot of heavy construction. So there are some existing saplings that are native trees that we will try to retain in certain locations. The invasive plants will go away, a lot of the pine trees will go away. You'll see an open landscape for the most part. That first growing season afterwards, you'll see a lot of grasses and sedges and forbs growing up right away. Within 5 years, you'll likely see some of those trees that were planted starting to poke through. And potentially within 10 years, you're starting to see Atlantic white cedar trees that could be 10, 15 plus feet tall. So it'll be an evolving landscape and be very different.
But it will look like what it is today in 10 years, but with different species.
In some years, that's right.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Before we go on, I just want to thank all of the commissioners for their thoughtful and, insightful questions. I think this has been a very good discussion, but I would like to continue the discussion by asking if there's anybody here in the audience who has any questions or comments. If you could just go to the microphone, and if you could give us your name for the record, please.
Roberta Shaw, 175 Gorham Road.
Thank you.
Our home is abutting what will become Cell 8, and I had some questions about mosquitoes. And certainly, you know, with everything that we've read about going on down in Wellfleet with mosquitoes, there's a salt marsh in Dartmouth that they're trying to dig runnels into to provide more flow, to keep mosquitoes out, et cetera. I think that some of the things that Mr. Chase was saying about better water flow would help with that. So, and then my other question really was, when is there an opportunity for the public and abutters to see a design and comment on a design and ask questions on a design? Because I haven't actually seen when that happens.
Okay, well, let me answer that in two ways. One, the hearings here of the Conservation Commission is an opportunity, and as Amy said, we do have the plans here and we can make those available. Now, Mike, my question to you is, are there going to be public hearings where the designs will be reviewed with the general public?
This is that forum.
This is that forum?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So, ma'am, if you would like copies of the plans to review, please contact Amy, and she can make those available to you. Or contact Mike, he might be able to make those available to you.
I can also get them to you by PDF.
Okay, fine. Now, anybody else? Okay, if you could go to the microphone and give us your name for the record, please.
John Shaw, 175 Gorham. The question is for the abutting properties on Gorham Road and Bank Street. Will they continue to have access from their properties to the trails that are being built? It's unclear exactly. Today, we can walk out the back of our properties, access the bog. Would that continue to be the case?
Yes, Mike, if you could respond to that, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Shaw. And we welcome all these questions, whether here or, I know we emailed also before this date. And we received other emails from folks with questions. I see one of the participants, Carla Burke, remotely. We've also spoken to her and some fellow neighbors in the Bank Street area. So the question about accessing the mapped trails from abutting properties, I think that would be best understood on a case-by-case basis relative to what the design trajectory looks like. So we're glad to meet you on your property and talk about how you access the property now and if it may be different or not. It might be the same, most likely the same, since the perimeter trail that exists now will, I believe it's fair to say, for the most part, be the same post-eco-restoration construction. But just to be sure, it would be great to meet on site and talk about your concerns. Is that helpful? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Sure.
Okay, is there anybody else in the audience here? You could just go to the microphone and give us your name for the record, please.
Alan Thompson. I'm at 62 Hoyt Road. I abut the irrigation pond. I'm not opposed to having it filled in because it is a tremendous mosquito haven. But a few things that do bother me. In all these changes that will be happening out on the bog and in around the bog, will it have any effect on the actual groundwater? Currently, I have a well. I water my lawn through the well whenever I do water, but I don't want to end up seeing whatever they've done. I don't think so, but I'd like to have a little assurance. I also would like to know about tidal impacts during major storms. Are we opening it up to saltwater flooding or more saltwater? It's been good. I've been at this site for 20 years, haven't had any problems. And I'd like to see it stay that way. In the, you have a lot of thoughts on water quality standards and all that going into the harbor. After this is done, but we can talk about that afterward. Yeah, but the big thing, just mosquitoes, tidal impacts, storm issue, major storm issues. We don't, like I say, no problems at this point, and I'd like to see whatever they do.
Okay.
It sounds good. I'm not opposed to having this happen, and I think it's a great idea. And, but I just don't want to have any adverse effects from it. So if I could know
Okay,
about.
thank you very much. It sounds like your two main questions are the impact on the water table and tidal impacts during storms. Can you respond to those two?
Yes, thanks, Alan. Great questions. And certainly something that we've been thinking about throughout the project with all the landowners that are around there. Regarding the groundwater first, like as I showed in some of the images from other project sites, it will look like a wetter site, but that's primarily because we're digging down into the surface and exposing that groundwater. So we're not anticipating a change in groundwater elevations through here. I can't predict what climate change, hydrologic changes that are happening regionally will do to those changing water tables. But the project itself should not have a significant impact on that. The tidal impacts, right now you have tidal flows that come in through there. Right now the Hoyt Road culvert is kind of the constraining factor to some degree. Tidal flows do come in. They're a little bit attenuated as they go back out, but there will be no change to that. Hoyt Road is not being altered as part of this project. The earthen berm and failing culvert that's immediately upstream of Hoyt Road will be removed. I don't know if you've been out there recently, but that's being eroded around. The river's trying to get around that right now. That's just a big metal pipe that I believe is bigger than the Hoyt Road culvert. So that's going to go away and won't be a constriction anymore. But the Hoyt Road one is really what's impacting any tidal flows that might be coming in. So coastal storm flowage inundates the whole site. Now it would, and it would in the future. Project's not going to impact that. We're dealing in an age of sea level rise. We know sea levels are rising. We know the rate to date. We don't know the rate in the future. We can make predictions, but we're sort of dealing with that uncertainty. But the project as designed will not be increasing tidal flow through Hoyt Road at all. It will be changing the water, as I showed, where Cold Brook goes. It's going to be a little bit different in certain locations. So as tides come in, as larger tides come in, it'll be going in slightly different locations. Won't be going into that tailwater pond anymore, but it'll be going a little bit further north. And so you'll see those slight variations. We did do some groundwater testing. We sunk some wells across cell 8 at the downstream end. I think, probably pretty close to your property, adjacent to that tailwater pond. And we put wells close to the edge of the bog, in the middle of the bog, in the middle of the channel, and on both the west and east sides, to see how far out into the bog surface, the tidal fluctuations impacted the groundwater underneath the bog surface. And it really didn't impact the groundwater elevations further towards the bog edges. So what that told us was, as we see these tidal fluctuations through cell 8, it's mostly impacting the water in the channel itself and the groundwater immediately adjacent to it. But it really that impact dissipates as you move further towards the bog edge.
So the property that sits next to the stream could have more saltwater effect than myself. Move back.
Yeah, if, at that far downstream end where the valley is really narrow, those houses that are closest to it are still not very close at that location. So I doubt they're seeing any impact right now, and there wouldn't be any change in the future on that.
Okay, thank you.
Great question.
Is there, Amy?
Just to elaborate on that, I think a positive change you would see is right now, if you had a massive coastal storm and water got all the way up in there, it would take it a lot longer to get out versus what's proposed because of all the impediments being removed. You'd actually, so if you were to get a big storm in the future, the water is going to be able to get out faster.
When there was an active bog, they used to have a gate there and close it, one way, type of thing. So when my time goes back to AD Makepeace, when they really took care of it was, I'm not sure what year the bogs were built, but they've been there all my life, and it's, and the thing that troubles me is that since AD Makepeace left and then the next owners, and there's always alterations and things going on, and I just, hey, whatever happened to wetlands control, this type of thing. So it sounds so positive, and so I'm kind of looking forward to this upgrade. I think it's in the right direction anyway.
Okay,
But,
do you have any more questions, Ella?
no, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience who has any more questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, is there anybody online or on the telephone who has any questions or comments at this time? Okay, hearing none, it is my sense that this hearing should be continued. And Amy, could you give me a sense as to when might be a good time to continue this hearing to?
Well, you folks give me an idea of when you can get, there was some sketches that needed to be handed in about the boardwalk and the crossings. A couple other things Brad mentioned. Our next meeting is July 6th. We would need revised information by the Wednesday prior, which is June 29th, which is 2 weeks from today. Is that feasible?
For those two elements, yes. The wild card is the natural heritage coordination. So I've been coordinating with Miss Deanne for months, but she's pretty backed up, so I just don't know when I'll hear back from her.
Okay,
We could, I would say let's do the 6th and
shall we do the 6th
play
or?
it by ear.
Mike, could you sort of inform us as to when your schedule would be, as to when you might feel that you need to have the follow-up hearing on this in order to keep with your schedule? Okay, Nick?
Yeah. Our other permits are actively in review as well. So, this summer is our permit review period. So I think let's shoot for the 6th.
Okay.
I will have a better idea in the next week or two if I get a response from Miss Deanne. If that's
Yeah.
not looking like it'll come.
Yeah.
The other option that we've done in other projects is had a condition that says, it can't be constructed until natural heritage, that coordination has been completed. So that's been something that
Yeah.
is a possibility also.
I think we would rather wait until we get it.
Absolutely.
It gets us, what it can happen is if for some reason, and it happened in one other project, that's why I say it, there was a big curveball that was thrown that was completely not what anybody was thinking Natural Heritage was gonna say. And it was a reopener, and we just wanna prevent that. And we also have a timing restriction as to when we can issue the permit after we've voted, so.
That sounds fine.
Okay, and I also think it might be helpful if, within that time period before that next hearing, you could have the discussion with Brad that you had talked about.
I'll
Because
coordinate
I
with you
think
after.
Brad raised some very good questions, and it would be helpful if we had answers to those questions at the next hearing.
That would be great. Yep.
Okay, so then if everybody's in agreement, could I have a motion that we continue this hearing till our meeting of July 6th, 2022?
I'll make a motion, we continue this Harwich Conservation Trust Brook Preserve meeting until July 6th.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Hearing no opposition, this hearing is continued till our meeting of July 6th, 2022. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay? Excuse me, sir, we need to move on till the next item?
Oh, I'm sorry.
He just wants.
No,
an
no,
email.
no, we have other items on the
Go ahead,
agenda.
guys, I'll write 'em in.
Okay. Okay, the next items on the agenda are, we have a order of conditions for 23 Wacquasit Road, map 5, parcel K1-2. This would be for a closing of the public hearing and an issuing of the order of conditions. Do we have any comments on that order of conditions?
I've reviewed them all, I have no comments.
Brad.
Ernie would be so proud that it never happens.
Does anybody else have any comments
Hold on,
on
what
that?
are we doing?
We're doing 23 Wacquasit Road.
Did you have any changes?
None so far. Anybody else have any comments? Wayne?
No.
Alan? Mark? And I don't. Okay, then I would like to call for a motion on closing the public hearing and issuing the order of conditions for this location.
I move that we issue an order of conditions for 23 Wacquasit Road, map 5, parcel K1-42, and close the public hearing.
Okay, do I have a second on that?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor and a second. Do I have any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Hearing no opposition, we have now closed the public hearing and issued the order of conditions for 23 Wacquasit Road. The next item on the agenda is again closing the public hearing and ordering and issuing the order of conditions on 91 Punkhorn Road, map 100, parcel A5. Any comments, Brad?
No, I didn't pick up anything.
Mark?
No comments.
Alan?
No
Wayne?
No.
Okay, hearing no comments, I would call for a motion.
I move that we accept the order of conditions for 91 Punkhorn Road, map 100, parcel A5.
Okay, and I would just like to add to that we also close the public hearing on this matter.
Thank you.
Okay, do I have a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing no opposition, we have now closed the public hearing and issued the order of conditions for 91 Punkhorn Road, map 100, parcel A5. Next item on the agenda, again, is a closing the public hearing and issuing the order of conditions for 2 Bora Drive, map 15, parcel V1-3. This is an amendment to order of conditions SE 32-2465. Brad, do you have any comments?
No?
Mark?
No.
Alan?
No.
Wayne?
No.
Okay, hearing no comments, I would call for a motion on this matter.
I move we approve the order conditions for Two Board Drive, map 15, parcel V1-3, amendment for OC SE 32-2465, and close the public hearing.
Okay,
Second.
okay, I have a motion on the floor and a second to that motion. Any discussion on the motion?
I'll
Hearing,
Second.
okay, hearing no, hearing no further discussion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing no opposition. We have closed the public hearing and issued the order of conditions for 2 Bora Drive, map 15, parcel V1-3, an amendment for order of conditions SE 32-2465. Next item on the agenda is, and I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, Quasin Lane, map 7, parcel A15. Again, this is a closing the public hearing and issuing the order of conditions as an amendment for order of condition SE 32-2434. Wayne, do you have any comments?
No, I do not.
Alan?
No.
Mark?
I do not.
Brad?
No?
Okay, hearing no comments, I'd call for a motion on this matter.
I'll make a motion that we approve the, what are we doing here?
Amendment.
Amendment for 2 Quasin Lane, map 7, parcel A50, and close out the meeting?
Public hearing?
Public hearing, there we go.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor and a second to that motion. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Hearing no opposition, we have now closed the public hearing and issued the order of conditions for 2 Quasit Lane, map 7, parcel A50, an amendment to order of conditions SE 32-2434. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a discussion and possible vote for 374 Main Street. General discussion about the commission's property and the possible proposed future activities thereon. Amy, do you want to start with comments on this matter?
Yes. We've hit a bit of a stumbling block on this, folks. So I was instructed by administration to kind of be a point person between the tech and the town and councils for finishing up like a better, draft IMA and proposal. So I met with the tech and the lawyers for the town and the tech last Friday. And the lawyers brought up that the way that the town acquired the land, which was from the Cape Cod Open Space Land Acquisition Program, also known as Self-Help Act, is problematic because with the way that was funded, and that's $630,000 worth of self-help money was used to purchase that. The town is obliged to provide passive recreation on this parcel. Whether or not that's been done or not for the past 20-some-odd years, this is just coming to light now. There really isn't passive recreation other than abutters being allowed to kind of use the land, but there's no parking area, there's no real public access that's happening now. And this is problematic for the tech in that while they want to do public days on the farm, essentially, that doesn't the lawyers are touching base and going to find out if that meets the requirement for public access on that parcel. Their inclination is that it is not. It will not. The other issue potentially is that the way it was purchased, the existing structures where these structures were at the time of the purchase, which I think is a farmhouse and a barn, those were allowed to be there, but the addition of new structures such as classrooms, potentially a caretaker's cottage that he mentioned, additional barns, things like that. That was not covered under the way way it was acquired. And that's problematic, obviously, for them as well. So I don't want us to waste our time going farther into the draft IMA at this point until this huge issue gets resolved. I talked to the tech, I have some, and I want to talk with them more about some creative ideas on how to allow passive recreation on a portion of the site while still letting the tech or whoever ends up with this property for a lease use somehow keep it separated so that it's safe, and you're keeping the activities separate, farming activities separate from the people, but to allow better public access to portions of the property. So I've asked for another meeting with them to kind of flesh out some of those ideas for enhanced public access or passive recreation on the property. So again, I think we've actually technically been in violation of, unknowingly, at least in the past 10 years, I mean, I have, that we really should have had more passive recreation allowed on this property, and that the prohibition of the general public should have not been allowed. So I wanted to put this on the next agenda to hopefully have more updates for you. If you have if you have questions for me, please let me know. It was a big shock. I didn't know that, I knew self-help had a lot of contingencies. I didn't know it was going to be so restrictive for this.
Excuse me, Amy, I just have one quick question that maybe we could sort of may suggest a route to explore.
Yep.
The entity that granted the funding, are they still in existence?
Yep, it's the Cape Cod Open Space and Land Acquisition Program.
Okay. Has there been any thought about going back to them to see whether or not they would be willing to amend some of the restrictions on the property?
We did talk about that. First, we wanted to investigate whether or not whether we had to do that. We also don't want to open up that can of worms and draw attention to the situation at this point.
Okay, I can understand why.
So yes, the answer is yes, we will, if that comes to that. You can also have a change to legislation, which is not something that the tech that's a big process.
Yeah, and
to
it's
change the
also a very
legislation.
time-consuming process.
Right. So we're not there yet, but
Okay.
it's gonna impact anybody who uses the property, regardless if it's the tech, a new lessee.
Right.
This is gonna impact anybody.
Alan, did you have a question?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman, how much money was funded by that organization to this purchase? All of it, or just?
$630,000.
They paid for everything, the town of Harwich
I don't
paid for
know if
nothing?
that was, so I have I can pass these out. These were in
The
your
article.
Dropbox. Yeah, this was, the estimated cost was $630,000. It didn't say that there was additional funds, and it was fully funded by self-help,
It says,
from my understanding,
so we didn't appropriate any in the town.
not that I understand.
All right, so we might wanna look at that, and the only reason why I'm
Because
thinking
here's
of
the
that.
deed too, and it says how much money was spent, and
Oh,
it's
yeah.
$630.
I understand the conveyance, but I'm just saying that if it's a fraction of the 630, if it's 5-10%, or if it's 50%, or if it's 100%, maybe that could be built into the lease, maybe we could pay it back. The leasee for the tech school could pay that back, to that obligation away. I mean, you gotta get creative in some of these things sometimes, and maybe that would be a way of doing that. If it's only
Yeah.
a small fraction of money that was contributed, and then they have this much grip on the property, we gotta
Yeah.
find that out.
Well, the
I
agreement's
will-
the agreement, and that's the language you have to look at.
Right. But
I'll
we-
ask, but
I mean, I think, Alan, that goes with my question with regard to going back to that entity, to seeing whether or not they would be willing to adjust some of the requirements. But I think from what I understand here from Amy is that the first attempt is to see what can be worked out with the tech school. And to the extent certain issues can't be worked out with the tech school, then that might be a route that we need to follow. and that may require some paying back in order to get them to agree to release some of the conditions.
And just one other thing, there has been passive recreation on that property since the lease's been there, because I've hunted on the upland around the perimeter of that bog.
Okay, we may need you to testify to
Well,
that now.
and a lot of others have too.
Yeah,
No, I'm
that's
saying
fine,
neighbors,
yeah.
some people have been allowed to. Is there a public access point per se, is another thing.
No.
So, I mean, I know that the current lessee has allowed certain people on the property, and especially neighbors, to walk animals. But does that meet the criteria for passive recreation necessarily, in terms of,
Probably not.
it doesn't really have great public access for it, that's all.
It's gated, he keeps it locked.
Yeah, you put a
Right.
fence around the whole perimeter.
I know, yeah, exactly, so that's where I'm a little
Yeah.
concerned.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments they want to mention at this point? Okay, so Amy, you're going to put
Yeah.
this on agenda
I'm gonna
for-
put it on the next one.
Okay,
and
fine.
we'll hopefully have an update. I'll
Okay,
keep
that would
putting
be
it on
fine.
until we have updates.
until we know. Okay,
Mr. Chair, I do have a
yes,
question.
go ahead, Mark.
Thank you. All of this being considered and thought through, clearly it's a big stumbling block. Sounds like we need to come up with a Plan B.
Yep.
Because that lease is due to expire
Yep,
November 1st, and we need to make a decision as to what direction it's gonna go in, whatever it is. In fairness to the current lessee, he needs to have time to do whatever is necessary
Get all this junk out of there?
to vacate or whatever it's going to be. So I think we need to come to a point here where we're gonna make a decision to act on this and decide what direction to move in. Seems to me we're
direction for
compelled to
this
do that,
one
really.
has to incorporate both conservation and agriculture. That's what's different with this one. So it has to include that.
And we extended to November 30th?
It was been extended through November this year.
But-
But that's not a lot of time with all the stuff that's out there, so that we could extend again, which actually is the selectmen too. You could extend, you could put out a release for, but that would impact any potential with this for a number of years. Yeah,
Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the restrictions are problematic with the current lessee.
potentially.
Yeah.
So the concept of,
We need to look at that too.
so
It's-
we really need to look at the restrictions first before we decide how to proceed.
Yeah.
Because this is coming to light and we're aware of this now.
Yeah, so.
We don't
what-
want to risk losing
Right,
property.
right.
Is that a possibility? Is it really? Yeah.
Not a strong one.
Lose it in what way?
We're using it, we're not allowing, there's some
We-
passive
we're-
recreation, but they would
We're not
probably
adhering to the
give us
agreement.
some, we're not adhering to the agreement. They can take the property or, I
Make us
believe,
pay for it.
yeah,
full
or make us
price.
pay for it.
Wow.
Right.
So,
Or they could take the property
we
back.
need to make some effort.
That's interesting.
They don't like to do that. We've had other self-help stuff in town. They give you a lot of avenues. They don't wanna mess with it, but,
The devil is in the details
so,
of everything.
I gotta read the town report.
Oh, boy.
Well, would it
What
be
year was that,
appropriate to,
2001?
the lease,
No, the purchase, 2000.
2000.
2000.
Town meeting,
Mark, did you
yeah,
have-
town meeting 2000.
Mark, did you have
would
another
it be
question?
appropriate to, contact the lessee with the expectation of the lease being terminated at whatever the date is, and bringing this issue to a vote to make a decision as to what direction to move in by a given date in the next calendar year. So gives us a little time to adjust, think of a plan B, follow through with the tech school or not, or go in a different direction, because obviously it's not something that's gonna pop in anybody's head in the next 10 minutes. So it sounds like we need some definitive guidelines here to,
Yeah.
Well, he
Well,
should
that-
definitely be reminded that he's gotta be out of there November 1st, and he needs to clean up that junk up there.
Well,
I can talk to Leo.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
this place is-
I mean, my question is, has the current lessee been informed of this issue?
Not of this most recent.
Okay,
I
I
wanted
think,
to talk to you first.
okay, thank you.
He is obviously aware that we've had, every meeting that we've had talking about the IMA,
Right.
I've notified him. I wanted to tell you first tonight. I mean, this was on an agenda, anybody could see it, but,
Well, he knows now, he'll watch on TV, so.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the current lessee needs, now
I'll
that
talk
we're
to,
aware.
yeah.
Yeah, just make him aware that there
I
is
will.
this issue.
I'm off for the next few days, but I'll call him when I get back.
Right.
And
And then if we have this on the agenda for the next meeting, he may want to be at the next
Yep.
meeting.
Also, we have, a different attorney from KP Law who's looking into this, but she also, we both agreed that we should bring Amy Questlin, who is really the land use attorney with KP, and she's like the top land use attorney at KP Law. We use her for wetlands a lot, but her real expertise is stuff like this. So we're gonna bring her in to this.
Yeah, it seems that analysis needs to happen first, and then seeing if the tech is interested in maybe finding a way to provide public access.
They seem very amenable. When talking with them when this bomb was dropped, both Bob Sanborn, I think, and at least myself on behalf of the town, are really want to work hard to try to make something work.
Yeah.
And we want to try to make it work.
Yeah.
So, so that's all I have on that. Before we go to minutes, I have one other thing that, sorry, it's not on here, but it's simple.
Go ahead, Amy.
Remember 163 Sisson Road next to the fire station?
Yeah.
It is my fault he was not on the agenda tonight. He had everything ready, and it was my fault when doing the agenda that it didn't make it on. He's been very responsive. Immediately after that last meeting, he called me. I went out there. We delineated the wetland. I flagged it, the 50 and 100-foot buffer zone for him. He has already been working with me to come up with a planting plan. He would like, he was hoping to come to the meeting tonight because he wanted your guidance. He wants to be able to move the fence soon, right now. But he wants to, does he have to move it to the 50? Does he have to move it to the 60? And would you be amenable to him doing it? Because he just wants to do it, and then get ready for planting in the fall. And the planting plan would come back to you.
Amy, is it a problem to wait till the July 6th meeting?
He would like, he has time, he himself is gonna be doing this, and he has time to do this before July 6th.
Yeah.
He's a restaurant owner for a couple businesses here, and once around July hits, he's worried about timing, and he really wants to be compliant and do this.
Okay, but I mean, personally, I'm concerned about our making a decision on this, having it not be on the agenda,
Yeah, I understand.
you know? And so I would prefer that we just make sure this is on the July 6th agenda. That's my personal feeling. I don't know about any of the other.
That's the right way to do it, I think.
In the fairness of all applicants
agree.
before,
Yeah.
yes.
I know, I said I would ask.
Goose and gander.
Yeah, it's fine that you asked.
I feel bad because it's my fault,
Yeah,
it's
no,
my fault.
and I understand how you feel, but I think we need to
Yeah.
stick with procedure.
Okay, all right,
Okay?
I get it.
Okay, so now let's move on to the minutes. The first, I don't know, do we want to take these all at once or one at a
Are
time?
you ready to do minutes? We only have 2 sets.
Okay,
So
which
it's not
two?
all 6.
which ones?
Which ones, Amy?
We have March 16th, 2022, and April 6th, 2022.
Okay. Well, then why don't we do them individually? Does anybody have any comments on the March 16th, 2022 minutes?
Yeah, it should be published. There was a lot going on.
Oh.
Yeah,
I was like, it is a pretty hefty one.
I can't believe all the work that went into doing it. So I gave it a quick look, and I think there's just one thing I want to change. That there's a lot there with the 2 docks.
Yeah.
But there was, let's see,
What, hearing?
it was the Sketchaconnet, 7 Sketchaconnet.
Yep.
If you go down that massive first paragraph on the next page, the start of the first complete paragraph on that next page, it says Mr. Atkinson
Yep.
asked for clarification. So a little further down, I expressed concern of no soft shell clams were present in the survey. And then there's a sentence, Mr. Chase stated that he had looked for them and found them there, but had not been conducted in a survey, so he didn't want to confuse results. To me, that sentence is confusing. I almost say strike it, because my point was that I was very concerned the fact that we keep seeing these shellfish surveys and then missing soft shell clams. And it just, I'm really upset about it. It keeps happening. But that sentence to me doesn't really add much to that.
Are you okay with striking it? So
I
it's
think
just-
so.
Okay.
I think you just strike the sentence. I expressed concern, that's in the minutes.
Yep,
And I think you just keep it simple and strike the sentence.
okay.
Okay, any other comments on that, on the March 16th minutes? Okay, hearing no other comments, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes of the meeting of March 16th, 2022 with the with the change that was suggested by Brad.
Seconded?
Okay, I have a motion on the floor in a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Okay, we've approved the minutes of March 16th, 2022, as amended by Brad's suggestion. Now, the minutes of April 6th, 2022. Does anybody have any comments on that? Brad?
No, that was all, no quorum, so that's an easy one.
Okay. Mark?
No remarks.
No.
Alan? Wayne? Okay. Having no comments, could I have a motion to approve the minutes of April 6, 2022?
I'll make a motion, we approve the minutes of April 6, 2022. Second.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor in a second. All those, any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Hearing no opposition, we have approved the minutes of April 6, 2022. Is there any other business or any other comments, Amy, that you would like to make?
Nope.
Okay, hearing any other business or any comments any of the commissioners would like to make? Hearing none, I would like to call for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll second that motion.
I think we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Nice job.
Good job, Mr. Chairman.
Nice job.
Yeah, good job.
Thank you.
Bunch of stuff for you folks to sign. I don't keep, yeah, oh, those.